All right, welcome back everyone to the deep dive. It's amazing to think about like how much information we encounter every single day, right?
It really is.
And it's not just the quantity, but also all the filters that we view it through. It's kind of a recipe for a distorted view of the world if we're not careful.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to today's deep dive, which is all about the fascinating topic of Stoic perception. Specifically, how can we use ancient Stoic wisdom to see through the noise and the bias in our super information saturated world?
Sounds good.
We've got a fantastic mix of sources for this one. We're going to be pulling some insights from the philosophy of Stoicism, particularly the writings of Marcus Aurelius. But we'll also bring in some modern ideas from the study of cognitive biases and even touch on some tips from the world of media literacy. What we really want to do is give you guys some solid tools and some actionable insights to help you navigate your own perceptions, the information you encounter, and, well, frankly, just see things more clearly. And I think a good place to start might be with the core Stoic idea that it's actually not events themselves that cause us distress, but rather our judgments about them.
You hit the nail on the head right there.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, that's a fundamental principle in Stoicism.
Yeah.
The Stoics really emphasize that it's not what happens to us, but how we interpret it
Mhm.
that determines our experience. Like, imagine you're really focused on getting external validation, like praise or recognition for your work. That might lead to a lot of anxiety and disappointment, right?
Right.
Because those things are outside of your control. But if you shift your focus to an internal sense of purpose, your own values, your own progress, well, now you're tapping into something more stable and more fulfilling.
That's so true. I know I've definitely fallen into the trap of like seeking that external validation and realizing it's just an endless cycle.
Yeah.
It's never enough.
You always need more and more.
Exactly, exactly.
So yeah, I mean, the Stoics had this really clear idea that events in themselves are neither inherently good nor bad. It's our judgment that assigns them those qualities.
That makes a lot of sense. So, like, if we're going to use this Stoic approach, what are some of the practical steps we can take to manage those judgments better, to see things a little more objectively?
Well, there are three core disciplines in Stoic philosophy:
Hmm.
perception, action, and will. And today, we're really diving deep into perception,
Okay.
which the Stoics sometimes called Stoic acceptance or the discipline of desire.
Okay.
It's all about learning to see the world clearly, striving for that objectivity. It's about accepting what we can't control.
Hmm.
And, I think that's huge in today's world where we have this illusion of control with so much information at our fingertips.
It's true. You feel like you can like learn about and control anything, but in reality you can't. So
Exactly.
the Stoic acceptance thing sounds like a powerful antidote to that, for sure.
Right. And a big part of perception is the importance of what the Stoics called certainty of judgment in the present moment.
Hmm.
They talk about embracing reality, what they call amor fati, loving one's fate. And a big part of that is using reason and making careful judgments instead of reacting impulsively or emotionally.
Gotcha. So it's not like we should be trying to just like suppress our emotions or anything like that.
Right. It's not about having no opinions or no judgments at all, but about choosing those judgments consciously and rationally. So you're not just having those kind of knee-jerk automatic reactions
Mhm.
to everything that happens. And this is where what they call the discipline of assent comes in.
Okay. What's that?
So the discipline of assent, it basically means that before you agree with a thought or an impression, you take a step back and evaluate it. You ask yourself, okay, is this really true? Is this a helpful way to look at this situation?
So you're like putting that little pause in before you just automatically react to things?
Exactly. And the Stoics, they were big on logic and reason. They saw our senses as the starting point for knowledge. So accurate perception was super important to them. They even had this image of impressions striking our minds, kind of like a seal on wax.
Yeah.
Some of those impressions are going to be accurate, but some are going to be distorted,
Yeah.
and we need to be able to tell the difference.
I like that analogy. It's like, are we getting a clear stamp or is it like blurry and messed up?
Precisely.
That's cool. So, okay. I know we want to talk about Marcus Aurelius. I mean, his meditations, those are kind of like the classic Stoic texts, right?
For sure.
They're super insightful.
Yeah. And what's interesting about the meditations is that they weren't originally intended for an audience.
Really?
It was more like his personal journal, like his private reflections on how to live a good life according to Stoic principles. And they're just packed with wisdom and practical advice.
That's so cool. So it's like we're getting a glimpse into his like internal struggles and his own journey with Stoicism.
Exactly.
That's really powerful.
And one of his most famous quotes, and it really captures the essence of Stoic perception, is, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength."
I love that quote. It's so simple, but so powerful.
Right. So what Aurelius is saying is that our real power lies in our own thoughts, our emotions, our reactions. We can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond.
So it's about that inner strength, that inner resilience.
Precisely.
And like taking responsibility for our own inner state rather than trying to like force the world to bend to our will, which I think a lot of us are guilty of, especially in today's world.
Absolutely. We often spend so much energy trying to control things we have no power over. And then we get frustrated and angry when things don't go our way. But the Stoics are saying, look, focus on what you can control, your own mind, your own choices.
So this is like a huge shift in perspective. Instead of being at the mercy of external events, we can kind of step back and choose our response. I mean, that's really empowering when you think about it.
Right. And it's not that we're going to be able to control our emotions perfectly all the time.
Yeah.
The Stoics weren't saying that we shouldn't feel anger or sadness or any other emotion. It's more about recognizing those emotions, acknowledging them, but not letting them dictate our actions.
Right.
Like you can feel angry without lashing out at someone, right?
Right. You can notice those feelings, but choose how you want to respond to them.
Exactly.
So it's
yeah.
like that space between the stimulus and the response, right?
Exactly. Viktor Frankl talked about that too.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got this Stoic idea of like focusing on our internal world, our attitudes, our inner state. It sounds great in theory, but how do we actually put this into practice? Like, what are some tangible steps we can take?
One thing that could be really helpful is journaling. Just taking some time to write down your thoughts and feelings can bring a lot of awareness to those automatic patterns we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And there are other tools like mindful meditation that can help us cultivate that inner awareness in that space to choose our response.
Right. It's like creating that pause button, that space between the stimulus and the response.
Exactly. Now, all of this gets really interesting when we start talking about cognitive biases. These are like filters in our minds that can distort how we perceive information.
Cognitive biases. Okay. I've heard of that, but remind me, what exactly are those?
So cognitive biases, they're basically these mental shortcuts that our brains use to process information more quickly. And they're often helpful, They help us make sense of a complex world. But the downside is that they can also lead to systematic errors in our thinking.
Oh, I see.
Like we might misinterpret information, we might make bad decisions. And two of the most common biases, and they're particularly relevant to this discussion, are negativity bias and confirmation bias.
Okay, those sound familiar. Let's break those down a bit.
Sure. So negativity bias, it's our tendency to pay more attention to and remember more vividly negative information compared to positive information.
So like if you had an amazing day, but one tiny bad thing happened, you'd only remember the bad thing.
Exactly. Like if you went on a beautiful hike in nature, but you saw one snake on the trail, you might be more likely to remember the snake than all the stunning views you saw.
Right. Makes sense.
And there's actually an evolutionary explanation for this.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So it's like hardwired into us.
Our ancestors, they had to be really attuned to threats in their environment to survive. It was more important for them to remember where that predator was lurking than to remember where the prettiest flowers were blooming.
Makes sense. I mean, a predator could kill you, so you want to avoid those.
Exactly. So negativity bias, it served us well in the past. But in today's world, it can lead to a pretty skewed perception of reality. We might overestimate the likelihood of bad things happening, and we might underestimate the good.
So it's like the world seems scarier and more dangerous than it actually is.
Exactly. Now, confirmation bias is another big one. This is our tendency to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs and to ignore or downplay information that contradicts them.
Oh, I see. So it's like cherry picking the evidence to support what we already think.
Precisely. It's like, imagine you're reading an article about climate change, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you already believe that climate change is a serious threat, you might be more likely to focus on the parts of the article that confirm that belief. And you might even dismiss or downplay any information that suggests otherwise.
Right.
And confirmation bias can manifest in a few ways. There's selective searching, where we actively look for information that supports our views.
Okay.
There's biased interpretation, where we twist information to fit our existing beliefs. And then there's even biased memory, where we're more likely to remember things that confirm our beliefs and forget things that don't.
So basically, it's this like self-reinforcing cycle. We believe something, then we only see the evidence that supports it, which makes us believe it even more strongly.
Exactly. And the online world, it's like a breeding ground for confirmation bias. We've got these algorithms, these filter bubbles, these echo chambers that just feed us more of what we already agree with.
Right. It's like that whole idea of like personalized news feeds and suggested content. It can be super convenient, but it also means we're less likely to be exposed to different viewpoints.
Exactly. So we end up in these little echo chambers where everyone's just agreeing with each other. And it becomes really hard to even imagine that other perspectives might exist.
So these two biases, negativity bias and confirmation bias, they sound like a pretty potent combination for distorting our view of the world.
They really are. And they play a huge role in how media operates and how we consume information. So it's really important to be aware of them.
So how can we use these Stoic ideas about perception to like counter these biases, to see through them and get a clearer picture of reality? What are some practical tools we can use?
Well, going back to what we talked about earlier, the concept of assent, that conscious choice about what we agree with, is crucial. We need to slow down before reacting to information, examine those initial impressions, and ask ourselves, is this really true? Is this a complete picture?
So it's about being more deliberate, more mindful of how we're processing information.
Exactly. And journaling can be a really powerful tool for this. Just taking some time to reflect on our thoughts and feelings, to examine those first impressions, can help us catch those biases in action.
Right. It's like shining a light on those unconscious patterns.
Precisely. And another helpful technique is what's called cognitive distancing.
Okay, I haven't heard of that one. What's that?
It's about creating some mental separation from your thoughts and impressions, recognizing that they're not necessarily you or the absolute truth. There's this great quote from Epictetus that captures this. He says, "You are merely an impression and not at all what you appear to be."
Oh, I like that. So it's like recognizing that our thoughts are just thoughts, are not facts.
Exactly. They're just mental events. And cognitive distancing encourages us to view our judgments as hypotheses, not conclusions. It's about saying, okay, I'm having this thought, this judgment, but is it really true? What's the evidence for and against it?
So it's like taking that scientist's approach, that skeptical but open-minded approach to our own thoughts.
Precisely. And the Stoics had a bunch of other exercises for cultivating this kind of clear perception. They talked about the view from above, which is kind of imagining yourself looking down on the situation from a higher perspective.
Okay.
They had premeditatio malorum, which is like mentally rehearsing potential problems beforehand so you're not caught off guard.
Oh, that's interesting.
They had this idea of asking yourself, what would Socrates do in a challenging situation?
Right.
And of course, they emphasized regular self-reflection, really examining your own thoughts, your own beliefs, your own patterns.
So it's like a whole toolbox of techniques for questioning our assumptions, for challenging our own biases, and for seeing the world more clearly.
Exactly. Now, in addition to these Stoic practices, there's another piece of the puzzle that's super important in today's world, and that's media literacy.
Yes, media literacy. I mean, that's like essential for navigating the constant stream of information we're bombarded with every day, especially online.
It really is.
So, what are some of the key things we need to keep in mind when it comes to media literacy?
Well, the first thing is to slow down. Don't just passively consume whatever's put in front of you. Take some time to really engage with the information you're encountering.
Mm-hmm.
Ask yourself, who created this? What's their purpose? Could there be any bias here? What information might be missing?
Right.
And it's important to seek out diverse sources of information. Don't just stick to the same news outlets or websites all the time. Expose yourself to different perspectives, even ones that might challenge your own views.
That's so important, especially in today's world where it's so easy to get stuck in those filter bubbles and echo chambers online.
Right. And another key skill is fact-checking. And this is where lateral reading comes in.
Okay, lateral reading. What's that?
So lateral reading, it basically means that instead of just reading down an article or a website, you open up multiple tabs and you do some research on the author, on the organization, on the claims being made. You look for corroborating evidence from other credible sources.
Oh, I see. So it's like cross-referencing, verifying the information before just taking it at face value.
Exactly. And when you're evaluating a source, look for signs of bias.
Hmm.
Is there a connection between the author and the topic that might influence their perspective? What's the tone of the piece? Does it seem balanced or one-sided?
Mm-hmm.
And always be mindful of your own confirmation bias. Remember that you're more likely to accept information that confirms your existing beliefs, so be extra critical of sources that align with your views.
Right. Don't just give those sources a free pass. Really scrutinize them just as much as you would a source that challenges your views.
Exactly. And there are some great tools out there to help with all of this. Media bias charts can give you a sense of the political leanings of different news outlets. And understanding how social media algorithms work can help you break out of those filter bubbles.
It's like arming yourself with the knowledge and the tools to be a more discerning consumer of information.
Precisely. Now, another powerful Stoic technique for navigating perception and dealing with challenging situations is what's called reframing.
Okay, reframing. I like the sound of that. What does that involve?
It's about recognizing that we have a choice in how we interpret events. Our initial interpretation might be negative or stressful, but we can choose to reframe the situation in a more positive or neutral light.
So it's like consciously shifting our perspective, changing the way we look at things.
Exactly. And one of the core ideas in Stoicism is accepting what you can't control.
Right.
So reframing can be really helpful in those situations. Instead of getting upset or frustrated about something you can't change, you can try to see it as an opportunity for growth, for learning, or for something else positive.
So like, I don't know, let's say your plans for the evening fall through unexpectedly. Instead of being disappointed, you could use that time to catch up on a book you've been meaning to read or do something else you enjoy.
Exactly. Or let's say you're stuck in traffic. Instead of getting angry and stressed, you could use that time to listen to a podcast or to practice some mindfulness techniques.
Right, right. It's about turning a potentially negative experience into something neutral or even positive.
Precisely. And there's this Stoic idea called the reserve clause, which is really helpful when it comes to reframing.
Reserve clause. Okay, haven't heard of that one.
It's basically this idea that whenever you make a plan or set a goal, you mentally add the phrase, fate permitting.
Oh, I like that.
So you're acknowledging that things might not go according to plan, but you're still going to do your best.
So it's like a built-in acceptance of the uncertainty of life.
Precisely.
So you're not setting yourself up for disappointment if things don't go exactly your way.
Right. And it can also help you make peace with past decisions, even if they didn't turn out how you expected.
So it's about letting go of that regret and accepting that you made the best choice you could with the information you had at the time.
Exactly. And another Stoic technique that can be really helpful for reframing is negative visualization.
Negative visualization. Okay, that sounds a little counterintuitive.
Yeah, it's basically the practice of imagining things going wrong, of contemplating potential setbacks and challenges.
So it's like mentally preparing yourself for the worst case scenario.
Right. And while that might sound kind of pessimistic, it can actually be really helpful for a few reasons. First, it helps us appreciate what we have.
Oh,
Yeah. If we regularly remind ourselves of the things that could go wrong, we're more likely to be grateful for the things that are going right.
makes sense.
Second, it helps us prepare for challenges. If we've already thought about what could go wrong, we're less likely to be caught off guard if those things actually do happen. And third, it can actually reduce anxiety. Yeah, because we're no longer avoiding those negative thoughts and feelings. We're actually confronting them head on.
Oh, that's interesting. It's like taking away the power of those fears and anxieties by facing them directly.
Precisely.
So it's really all about that power of perspective, right?
It really is.
How we choose to interpret events, the lens we use to see the world, it makes all the difference. And the Stoics really understood this.
Absolutely.
Wow. This has been a fascinating deep dive, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. But I think the big takeaway here is that we have more control over our perception than we often realize.
Right. We can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond, how we interpret it.
And by using these Stoic tools, by being aware of our biases, and by practicing media literacy, we can cultivate a clearer, more objective view of the world and navigate all the information out there more effectively.
Absolutely. It's all about taking that power back into our own hands.
And I think Marcus Aurelius said it best. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength.
Words to live by for sure.
Definitely. So as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you guys with one final thought to ponder. It's kind of a challenge for you to take this idea of reframing and apply it to your own life.
Okay, I like it.
So think back to a recent event that you initially judged with maybe some harshness or negativity. It could be anything. A disagreement, a setback, a disappointment. And now take a moment, just a few moments, to step back and try to reframe that event objectively. Can you summarize it in a single concise sentence, but this time with a neutral perspective, maybe even seeing a potential upside?
It's a great challenge.
For example, instead of thinking my train was so late and it totally ruined my morning, maybe you could reframe it as my commute was delayed and it gave me some unexpected time to catch up on my favorite podcast. It's a small shift, but it can make a world of difference in how you feel and how you approach the rest of your day.
Yeah, it's a great example. And I think it highlights how powerful this Stoic idea of reframing can be.
Absolutely. So keep reflecting on these ideas, experiment with these tools, and let us know what you discover. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.